Hi, Dave Borton, Mill City Roasters in Minneapolis, along with Joe Morocco, Cafe Imports. Today we're going to take a look at roasting the Yemen Mocha. It's at 7,200 feet. It's a very high grown, but it's tiny one. It's a size 10 through 14, so I thought Joe would lend us his expertise. When we're finished with the roast, we're going to move into sensory analysis. Joe's going to give us some tips from the top. Joe is former barista champ of the Midwest, former commercial roaster at Caldi's, and now director of education at Cafe Imports. Before we get further, I want to thank everybody out there for their emails and their notes of appreciation. That kind of feedback is very helpful to both Joe and me to do our programming. So we've got some questions that have come in this month, and Joe will tackle those when we get into the discussion of sensory analysis. So, Joe, when you're ready, I'm ready.
I believe I'm ready. So yeah, we're gonna roast a Mocha from Yemen today. And this, I haven't really dug into it too much, so I've made a few assumptions about the coffee based on some conversations with Dave, based on other years that I've roasted Yemen coffees, and based on the screen size, all of those different things. So one of the things that we're going to really be paying close attention to is how this coffee smells and how the coffee looks while we're roasting it. We're not going to rely on our ears quite as much as we do other times for things like first crack. And that's going to go really well directly into sensory analysis, because we're going to be using our senses to analyze the coffee while we're roasting it. So let's get started. Where are we at on temp?
We've got 1 kilo. You're at 392 ambient temp, Joe.
Great. And I'm going to get this timer started here.
Give me a call.
I'm going to give you a call. I apologize for putting my back to you all. Get to see my best side. All right, I'm going to raise the temp a little bit here. Get it up a little hotter.
And those of you at home, if you've ever roasted the Maui Mocha, you're going to have experienced what we do with this as a silent first crack. And so Joe's going to talk about that. Now that Maui Mocha, those cells aren't going to be as tight as this Yemen because of the difference in elevation of 800 feet compared to 7,200 feet. But that small screen size is something you've had to deal with on the Maui Mocha.
Absolutely. And the Mocha variety, which this is several different old school varieties that are making up this particular Yemen, but they're very Mocha, I guess, close. So the Mocha variety is an old variety that came directly from Ethiopia and transplanted into Yemen and has been cultivated there for 1,500 years or so, for a very long time.
It's absolutely fascinating part of coffee.
Okay, we are at about 400 degrees, and I think I'm gonna drop her. I'll give you the heads up here. 3, 2, 1, and dropping. And I've dropped my gas down to 1, just to give it some time to absorb that heat in the drum. And I'm backing my airflow down to about 20. About 30.
Yes, if we go below 30 on this particular setting, the impeller will slow down and then stop. So I use 30 as the lowest setting.
Nick? Great.
We have a question from Brian V. He's wondering how screen size impacts your roasting.
So it can impact your roasting in a few different ways. Firstly, if you have a very large disparity between the largest screen size and the smallest screen size, then you know you're probably going to need to elongate your roast and use a little bit more of a slope curve, like a not quite so jumpy of a curve.
That's
I'm going to go ahead and crank this gas, and we're cranking this up to about 5
inches of water column.
because those small beans will tend to want to roast a little faster than the large beans. The large beans will take more time, so by elongating that roast out, you're kind of deferring the heat to the mass a little bit more evenly. However, if you have a smaller bean size, each individual bean is going to take on heat a lot more quickly than if all of the beans in that batch were larger. The distance from the outside of the bean to the core of that bean is smaller, so you have a tendency to have that heat move to the core of the bean much more quickly. So since the heat's going to move to the core of this coffee much more quickly, we're going to crank up the air a little bit earlier than I would on a typical coffee, because I want to get the moisture out of the way once I have penetrated the coffee with heat.
Joe, one other thing I've noticed, let's say I'm roasting and I've got 14 through 18 in there.
Yes.
I've got a lot of disparity. That first crack is much longer than if they're all uniform 16s.
That's absolutely true. If you move coffee too quickly through a roast that is a wide spread on your screen size, you'll notice that at the end of your roast also it'll be kind of calico in color because you have varying grades of coffee. Don't confuse a grade of coffee with quality. When talking about screen size is different grades of coffee. They consider that to be a grade. Okay, how are we doing here?
2.5 minutes, 302.
And where are we on rate of rise? We're at about 16 to 17 degrees per 30 seconds. We jumped up there pretty quick in the beginning. The highest we were at was about 20 per 30 seconds for just a moment. I like to be somewhere in that 15 to 17 on this coffee. So
a lot of guys out there call it by 1 minute intervals. So anytime Joe calls out his interval, merely double it if you're using per minute rate of rise.
And I like 30 seconds because I can make tighter calls on how that coffee is moving. If you're only roasting 10 minutes and you wait for 1 minute, that's 10% of your overall roast. Whereas if I am able to do that in a smaller gap, it's 5% of my roast in 30 seconds.
One of the things Joe and I were talking about before we commenced today is the interval, and that's what he's addressing, whether you look at a 30-second interval or a full minute interval, and you really correct that roast. You've got up until about 4 minutes and 30 seconds to determine if you're on target, behind on the roast, or ahead on the roast.
And I'm increasing airflow just a little bit right now because I'm smelling a little bit of smoke on the coffee, and the coffee is still fairly green. I am getting some yellowing, which I'll bring to the fore here, but it's still pretty green. And
4.5 minutes, 3:35.
Thank you. If I'm smelling a little bit of that smoke, I need to get that moving out and maybe draw a little bit more cool air into the drum. Kind of put the brakes on it just a touch.
And what that smoking in the early on a natural is residual mucilage, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Not, I would call it residual sugar or residual cherry matter. The parchment skin itself has been removed, which has the mucilage attached to it, but some of the material from that, which is technically still some of the molecules from the mucilage, has permeated through, soaked through, and adhered to the silver skin.
5.25 minutes, 3:45.
Great. And we are sitting at about 7-ish degrees per 30 seconds. It's a nice clip. And we are
End of drying?
at yellow. Yep, that's right. And so I'm going to increase my airflow a little bit more. Go ahead.
Joe turns up his airflow as he marks end of drying.
And notice that I have not touched the gas yet. We've learned on this drum that by adjusting the airflow, we're adjusting the heat intake as well. So if I were to adjust the gas right now, which I would on some of the roasters that I use, while also adding more airflow, it would drop the temperature, the rate of rise on this coffee too much. So I want to kind of stagger those adjustments as I can.
6 minutes, 360 degrees.
And my rate of rise is holding pretty steady. And right now, that's a good time for it to hold steady, because now that that moisture is out of the way, now that I'm starting to smell some of those bready, cookie-like, bakery, pastry-style aromas, I know that I'm firmly in the Maillard reaction and some caramelization is happening as well. So I want to stay there and allow those things to happen. If I draw it out too slowly, the aroma will slacken and I'm no longer getting all of that bouquet. If I do it too quickly, then that aroma is going to turn to be very sharp and a little bit smoky, which means I'm burning out those flavors and aromas.
Is bouquet the magic word? Do you remember Groucho Marx, You Bet Your Life?
I do remember Groucho Marx.
The duck would come down with the magic word of the day.
I do remember that. Oh yeah, now I'm starting to smell some of that
Is spiking.
cherry. So I'm getting a burst of aroma, and that's happening simultaneously with him saying that it's spiking. That's no coincidence. So I'm going to draw my gas down this time.
7.5,
We're at about
378.
3.5 on our inches of gas. All right. On this particular coffee, we're probably not going to get a very loud aromatic first crack, which is one of the reasons that Dave wanted to roast this coffee with you today. He started roasting his coffee and noticing that, wow, the first crack is completely silent. So we can, however, get the aroma of a first crack. I hate to use the analogy silent but deadly, but I think if the shoe fits.
382.
And we had a quick question about...
Yeah, 8 minutes.
Do you guys have a target rate of rise during this roast?
A target rate of rise is going to be kind of a moving target. At the beginning, right away out of the gate, we were at about 20 degrees per 30 seconds. I really like to see it closer to 17 degrees per 30 seconds, so I brought it down. And that rate of rise will slowly slope downward. So where I held the rate of rise close to that yellowing stage and through that yellowing stage was at about 7 degrees per 30 seconds. As we get to first crack, it's going to narrow a little bit more. I don't want to get less than about 3 degrees per 30 seconds, which where are we at right now?
You are at 389. Want to
389.
open the air, Joe?
Yeah, we'll open it a little bit more here. It's about 60. And I am starting to smell what I would consider to be the beginnings of first crack. You want to smell that?
And so Joe's doing that on visuals and with smell. There is no audible first crack here whatsoever. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Say hi to Jeff Frank.
Jeff, I would like you to have Ellen teach you how to roast.
And we have some questions from Jeff and Ellen here in just a little bit.
We'll be fielding them in a little bit.
Yeah, we are full-blown first crack now.
Joe, I'm not going to interrupt you with a question. Right now, we'll go right through until we finish this roast.
Right.
I'm sorry, what did you want?
Oh, no,
Mark?
that's okay.
8.5?
Yeah, right around 8.5 to 9. And then we're sloping in our rate of rise pretty significantly after that last little airflow bump.
I noticed on this particular roaster, the use of the trier impacts the roast curve, and I believe it's false data. I
it
don't
totally
think,
is, because as soon as I left it in, it jumped up in
Yep.
a very steep way. Oh, and you know what else is influencing it? Is this little cord. If I bump this little cord, it is making a jagged portrayal there.
Is that on the ambient temp or on the bean temp?
That is on the bean temp.
Yeah.
But not to worry, we're not roasting
You're
temperature, we're
215
roasting coffee.
Into first crack.
215 into first crack, and we are almost there. I would say probably another 20-ish seconds. And it's smelling absolutely beautiful. It's smelling like strawberry brownies and cinnamon. You want to smell that? Wow. Okay. I'm going to give it another couple seconds here. And I am done with it. How are we looking?
Joe ran that one 3 minutes past assumed first crack. Again, we had no audible cracks, and so Joe called it about 8.5 minutes. As he said, that could have been 9 minutes. It's a rough call when you've got no audible sound.
And you'll generally smell a little bit of what you would consider a first crack prior to first crack on all coffees. It'll start giving away that aroma before it starts bursting. Now, one of the reasons that this is so quiet is because the bean size is so small. If you think about something popping, like a balloon for instance, if you have a really big balloon that has a lot of volumetric space, when you pop that balloon, the acoustics of that will fill the room. You have a larger concussion, and that noise that you get is the concussion, the energy. Sound is an energy wave that's moving through space. So you're getting a concussion from a larger mass size. Whereas these are so small, that concussion is very small and it can't make its way through the drum wall.
The sound can't.
The sound cannot, right. So as I pull out the trier, I could hear a tiny little clicking noise in the drum, but it's almost inaudible. And that was not until after I was smelling it for quite some time.
Joe, when I hear first crack, what exactly is the food chemistry going on in there? Is that gases coming through cell walls? Is that steam coming through cell walls? What is it that I'm hearing?
That is a great question. Firstly, steam is a gas, so some of that is there. That is not steam from free moving water particles, because that had all been evaporated basically down to about 1% during the first initial part of that roast. That 1% maintains throughout the entire roast because as more steam leaves, you're creating steam. As you're breaking a molecule down, it's giving off particulate molecules. Some of those stay within the coffee itself, but some of those leave as gas. So there are all different kinds of gas. There are alcohols, there's H2O, and a lot of carbon dioxide. They say that the volume of one coffee seed, the volume of carbon dioxide that one coffee seed creates is about 3 times its own mass, its own volume. So
We could
that's
blow
a
up
lot
a
of
lot
carbon
of
dioxide.
balloons.
Yes, you could blow up a lot of balloons. And if you want to try that, you can actually take the coffee that is roasted right out of the drum, put it into a balloon and tie it up. And you can watch that balloon inflate over the next few days.
Joe, then if and when I have a customer that needs me to go in the second crack and I hear the Rice Krispies, what I'm hearing is the destruction of the cell wall.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. There is still pressure components to that. The pressure components are no longer swelling the space because during first crack, your coffee seed goes into what we call a plastic state. It's very malleable. I am a foolish person, maybe some may say. I've taken coffee seeds out while they're in first crack and just popped them in my mouth and bite on them while they're very hot, and they're squishy. And then as soon as my saliva and flesh cool that coffee seed off, they become very crystallized and brittle, almost like you would think of sugar as you pull it off of a pan when you're caramelizing it and then put it over something cold, and that's when it gets hard. Coffee's doing the same thing. However, in second crack, it does not enter that plastic state. It's more rigid. There is still some swelling, but at that point, you're really crackling the cell matrix itself in a big way.
Do you still do that?
Yeah,
Not as frequently, though, do you?
maybe more.
Okay.
Quick question for Brian again. If you guys were going to roast a 400-gram sample, how would that differ from the roast you just did?
If we were doing that on the same drum,
Same machine, same everything.
Very carefully.
Yes.
Smaller capacity.
Yeah, I look at that kind of as I would look at building a model. I would have kind of the same structure to the curve, the same periods on that curve for air adjustment and gas adjustment, but everything would be a little bit more condensed down to fit the needs of that particular coffee. So it probably wouldn't last as long in the drum. And you wouldn't want to go too small on certain drums. You know, if you have a very large drum, you don't want to go below a certain capacity for that particular drum. There are rules of thumb. 50% is kind of a big rule of thumb, but that's generally talking about, you know, very large pieces of equipment. If I have a 70 kilo machine, I shouldn't go below 35 kilos. However, some of the smaller drums have environmental systems that are set up to where doing a 100 gram batch on a 500 gram machine, even though that's less than 50%, you still have such small control space that you can still control that roast within that
And watch
system.
your airflow.
Yes, airflow is very important.
Airflow is very critical because you don't have the weight, you don't have the mass, and airflow is going to impact that volume and blow it all over the place. So you're going to have to taper back your airflow.
And I don't make any money based on how many machines North sells or Mill City sells, but one of the beautiful things about a North machine is that drum speed control. So you can slow that drum down to where you give that coffee a little bit more surface time, to where your bean mass, instead of it, you know, like for instance, if you have a space this big and you have it filled to capacity, which usually takes up about a third of that space, your bean speed, your drum speed is going to toss those seeds around in a way that is best for that system. However, if you have an eighth of that space filled with coffee, you can create that same environment by slowing that drum speed down so that those beans have a similar surface contact time with both the drum wall and themselves. Of course, the air that's moving through that space is going to take up a larger percentage of your overall heat, of your overall volume of that drum. And so it's going to weigh a lot more on your gauges. So you really have to pay close attention to the coffee. And anytime you make adjustments like that, which I know I'm kind of jumping in here on the fly and roasting a coffee and saying this is a solid roast. But if I was in a production scene I said, you know, I need to roast 30% capacity, I would want to do 5 roasts, 6 roasts, and cup them all, see how they all taste, see where it tastes the best, and then continue my progress after that. Really hone in on a profile.
2 things, Joe.
Yes, sir.
We get a lot of new roasters, new customers to the North line, and they too soon want to jump to those smaller capacity sizes. And I really try to impress on those folks that buy them, master capacity first.
Absolutely.
Don't try and save pennies and say, well, I'm going to just run a pound through this 1 kilo machine until I learn it. Just the opposite. You should be doing 20 roasts on that at full capacity, 2.2 pounds, and learn how to master your profile at full capacity, and then start working your way backwards in 200 gram increments, rather than just go ahead and say, well, I'm going to do under capacity.
Yeah, my advisory on this is, and I'm going to be a little firm here, these are not easy bake ovens. These are real pieces of industrial equipment that can roast to the standard of a large machine that you would have in a professional company. So it's kind of like buying a Viking stove that you would put into an industrial kitchen and using it for 1 hamburger if you're doing it that way. Figure out how to use that equipment for what it's made for, and then you can do that hamburger exceptionally well. If you throw too much fire at something though, you're going to be very confused, you're going to be in the weeds, and you're going to waste more product than if you would just invest the product in the beginning.
And so, Brian, my response was not to your question at all. Very valid question.
Oh, yes.
But rather, as the guy picking up the phone every day saying, I can't figure out how to do 300 grams on this roaster, take it easy. Learn how to master that first. To give you an idea, The capacity here on this one is 1 kilo, 2.2 pounds. I can go down to 200 grams on that.
Yep.
I can get this mastered, so I'm doing what's that? Do the math for me. That's a little about 12% of capacity.
Something like that, yeah.
Over on the 500 gram sampler, I've got it down so that I can do 200 grams on that, and I'm roasting now at 100 grams, but I'm not getting there in one roast. I'm talking 6, 8, 10, 12, because I've got such a small capacity or a small amount of beans I'm putting into a 500 drum. I've got to really marry and get in concert that charge, the airflow, and the temps. It's tough.
And if you think about it as that model again, when you make a change and you have such a small amount of coffee, that change affects that coffee much more quickly and in a much bigger way. Whereas if you have a full batch, you can make an adjustment and then see how that adjustment manifests because you have a little bit larger window of time. So you don't have to be quite as tuned in and focused.
Let's bridge this. Let's move into some questions. We've got frank questions from Ellen.
They have dubbed these, quote unquote, frankly speaking.
Oh, very nice. This comes from Ellen and Jeff Frank in Auburn, Iowa.
And I got a lovely note from them.
Little Green Truck Coffee. Little Green
Coffee cup. No, it's a green truck.
Little Green Truck Coffee in Auburn, Iowa. So, very good.
All right. So, number one question, and we have three. In your devotion to education, do you address/advocate the health benefits of coffee? I do, but only when they pose themselves. I do believe fully in the health benefits of coffee, but I also don't want to pretend to be a doctor, and I also don't want to twist people's arm to drinking coffee for health benefits. I want to twist their arm because it tastes so freaking good.
So you're not a doctor, but
Not
you
a doctor.
were Midwest Barista Champ.
Yes.
And you were a commercial roaster,
That's correct.
but not a doctor.
Not a doctor.
Okay.
I've been several things, but I haven't been confused with being a doctor yet. Okay. Second question. And these are, again, frankly speaking, questions from a beginning roaster. Number 2, in a rural area, basically unaware of quality coffee, and quality is underlined, so that is not my emphasis, and general unavailability of fresh/quality coffee, how would you invite and where and how would you begin to educate a general audience?
Great question, Ellen. So many of our clients, our customers, are people that are starting out a business, farmers markets, friends at the work, floral shops in town, consignments at the beauty shop. So that's a good question for tons of our customers.
Absolutely. My answer to that question is this. Coffee starts as a seed. It's a tiny little seed and it's planted in the ground. And that seed takes a long time to germinate. And that germinating process doesn't yield fruit for 3 to 5 years. And I think the same is true for a coffee customer relationship. You are there to plant a seed of quality, an idea that coffee can be more than just the status quo and the nostalgic flavor of burnt canned coffee that people have ingrained in their memories from childhood. So you're planting a seed, and my opinion for that is that in order to plant a seed that's successful, you have to prepare the place for that seed to be able to grow and thrive. And the way that we do that in specialty coffee is through relationships with our customer, through being available, through being friendly, through being honest and transparent, and providing all of those core things that any relationship needs from the get-go. So it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to have a huge fan base overnight. It takes a lot of time, and you have to be patient. Be patient with yourself as you're learning. Stay one step ahead of your customer in their education, and know that you're not there to be a bully teacher, but you're there to be, You're there to share something that you really enjoy, and they will come along after that.
But like in Ellen's case, or customers who have a rural base, they're known within the community for other relationships, the best farmer in the area,
Yes.
that kind of thing. And so that's something that's sometimes more easily built
You have an advantage.
in the smaller communities than in a metro area like St. Paul, Minneapolis.
That's right. Absolutely.
Very good.
All right.
Nick.
Next question.
I'm gonna jump in real quick.
Oh wait, we're gonna get an interspersed question for a moment.
Interspersed question. So Brian's rephrased this, and I think it's going to help us. How do you go about developing profiles for new coffees when you're trying to be conservative with that green?
That's a
I
great
can
question.
tell you how I do it and then see if you will critique
Oh,
it.
please. Please. I love disagreements.
I'll get a sample in, and some importers will give us 200 grams, some will give us a full pound. You do the absolute best you can on that roast. You've got one shot, one bite at the apple. When I pick up that coffee, let's say I've bought this Yemen from Joe. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at that profile of the sample roast, cup it, and see if there's anything I can glean from that that helps me better understand what I'm experiencing in the cup. And so, Brian, what I'll typically do is take, in this case, let's take this Yemen. I roast this 2 minutes into first crack as my beginning point. Then I'm going to back up and I'll roast it about a minute 45 to a minute 50 into first crack. And then I'll bend over the top and go 207 to 210. Now you can transpose that approach on any coffee, and then I'll sit with those three profiles and cup those coffees out and determine how does this coffee best present.
Yep, that's great explanation. To borrow a phrase from my alma mater, Caldy's, one of our statements that we made all the time was constant improvement. You are always developing a profile. That profile should never be static. So from the very first time you get the coffee to the time that coffee has run its course, you're developing a profile. You're tracking the cupping notes that you've had across that coffee's life with you, and you're tracking all of the profiles that you have discarded along the way. And you're gleaning that information so that, for instance, if I get a Costa Rica that's grown at 1,800 meters and I know that it's good varieties and it's a wash process, the next time I get a Costa Rica that's grown at 1,800 meters and it's good varieties and it's a wash process, maybe even from the same farmer area, I can go back to the information that I've already worked through and glean information from that and have at least a starting point. If you don't have any starting point, if you're just blank to it completely, look at the density of the coffee, look at the screen size of the coffee, the variety of the coffee, and where that coffee came from. Think about what flavors you want to present from that coffee, from the selling points that that coffee has. So generally, if you're buying from an importer or from Mill City or from whomever you're buying that coffee from, they're going to have some kind of flavor profile that they've already given you. So if you know it's a really high acid coffee, but you want to bring out more sweetness, then do what you have learned as a roaster on all of the other coffees that you've roasted that manifest that result with coffees in a general way, and apply just a general starting profile to it and then flesh it out over time. Remember that your coffee doesn't have to be roasted to its fullest potential on the first time. And honestly speaking, your coffee will probably never be roasted to its fullest potential in our minds, because we're perfectionists, we're nerds, we're geeks. So find also comfort in, if it's in a range of acceptability for you, that you can feel confident in putting that coffee out and knowing that it's always going to be a work in progress.
Very good. Hope that helps, Brian. Joe, you had one more question from Ellen, I believe.
That I did. Sorry, this coffee is so good. I keep drinking it.
Banco Cooperative.
It's really nice. Question number 3. How do you distinguish a musty, woodsy versus old/low quality essence in a coffee if you weren't sure of the freshness? I would say that those things are kind of the same thing. Now, musty could be a mold or some kind of infection in the coffee, whereas woodsy would be, it could be low grown or it could be old. It's tasting papery or cellulose heavy. It doesn't have the sweetness and acidity that it used to. Either way, if I'm tasting those flavor characteristics, that is a coffee that I'm going to want to try to roast darker. I'm going to try to move through, or don't make that purchase if you're tasting that in the beginning of that. Like if you're making a purchasing decision, don't buy a coffee that has those flavors, because those are flavors that will grow. Sweetness, acidity, body, the really pleasant things about coffee, those are flavors that are fleeting. But the woodsy, moldy, musty stuff, that will grow and overtake the rest of your coffee. You can only roast coffee so dark to where you don't taste the coffee anymore at all. So,
Joe, why don't you pull up a chair and we'll do some
Yes.
sensory analysis.
Great.
The Deep Dark Secret of Sensory Analysis by Joe Morocco.
There are no secrets here.
Joe, before we start, when
Yes.
you're talking about sensory analysis today, you're not talking about just jumping right into that flavor wheel. You know, the new splash is UC Davis puts out a new flavor wheel, and everybody's running to that for sensory analysis.
Yeah, the flavor wheel can be a decent tool, but it's a tool for communication. It's a post-sensory analysis tool that you can filter your words through, so that it having been tied to a lexicon, that lexicon, as it becomes more and more widespread in its use, when somebody is in Scotland and somebody else is in Costa Rica and somebody else is in China, they can go to that lexicon and they can go to the flavor wheel and they can say, okay, I'm tasting, what do they taste
Raspberry.
in Scotland? Haggis?
Bog.
Yeah, I'm tasting these flavors and they're most similar to what the lexicon calls this flavor. So when I'm communicating with somebody else in a different part of the world, I can go to the flavor wheel and say, this is the zone of flavor that I'm getting. And then they can take their experience from where they are, adhere that to the lexicon, go to the flavor wheel, and say, oh yes, I am in the same zone as you. Because all over the world, we have very, very different experiences with flavor.
Very good. And so you're not starting with the flavor wheel at all.
Right.
You're backing us up and taking us into sensory analysis, which is?
So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just breaching the subject of formal sensory analysis with you all. This is a class that I've helped a lot with the SCAA in developing, and it's something that I feel can be a vital tool in your tool belt.
So if somebody's
Yeah.
appetite is whet today, this is one of the SCAA courses that'll be offered in Atlanta.
And I will be teaching this at the Roasters Guild retreat in August too.
Which is where?
Yep.
Stevens Point?
Yep, Stevens Point.
Stevens Point, Wisconsin.
Or no, not Stevens Point. It's in Delavan, Wisconsin. Sorry.
Very good.
So sensory analysis, I just pulled a strict definition off of the internet, which is a scientific discipline that applies principles of experimental design and statistical analysis to use human senses, sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, for the purposes of evaluating consumer products. Now, I'll simplify that as saying, when we talk about a scientific discipline, that means that you go in with a hypothesis or a projected reason, an outcome that you are expecting to get, and you go in with data that you are specifically trying to collect from your analysis through whatever method of experimentation you're using, and you're collecting all of that in a very statistical way that you can then analyze later. So, for instance, Coke versus Pepsi is a great systematic, formal sensory analysis where you just have random people walk up, they don't know which soda they're drinking, and they taste them both and they decide which one they like. That's going in with a purpose to figure out which one people are going to like more. It's going in with a method. You're going to blind everything. You're going to not tell them what they're tasting. And it's going in with the desired outcome, which is figuring out which one they like better.
So give us a farmer's market example of that.
Yeah, a farmer's market example would be, for instance, if you are looking to enter into a farmer's market business and you're saying, I want to sell my coffee here in the Minneapolis downtown farmer's market, I need to figure out how I'm going to roast my coffee and what coffees to choose and how I want to brew these coffees. It would be smart to go in with several different roasts, several different coffees, and have a consumer consensus test where they can test your different coffees and give you what they like. You're building relationship. That's a bonus, but you're also figuring out where people are, because I think one of the biggest apprehension, or one of the biggest hurdles that we in specialty coffee have, is we know how good coffee can be, and we have this idealistic view of the perfect cup of coffee, and we want everybody in the world to try this coffee, and sometimes that becomes a bigger goal to selling coffee. But we have to sell coffee, and we have to build the bridge over time to move people from being just a simple consumer of caffeine to being a educated consumer of your specialty product.
Very good. I assume that's germane even to Ellen's question. As
Absolutely.
she starts out there, that's one of the things Ellen can do is start with a light roast, medium roast, and a dark roast, and find out which of the ones people enjoy the best.
That's right. So sensory analysis can be a tool that you can use for new products, for discovering what a market will tolerate, to see how a product is lasting over time. So if you are a roaster and you're developing a profile, see how that profile is developing, getting progressively better, or progressively worse. If you have a particular flavor that you're trying to continue to foster in your coffee, having a formal sensory analysis program can help you taste that and categorize that and maintain that product.
To give you an example, there's a roaster in town. She cups that coffee every day. Mm-hmm. She wants to ensure that that coffee remains consistent with the profile, with what they're trying to achieve in that particular coffee, day after day after day for 70 days until that coffee runs out. So she's using sensory analysis.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. Also, when we're talking about another one of the questions that came through, that woodsy or musty flavor, we call that taint potential. If you're getting a little hint of something like that early, then you know that is going to be a potential problem that's growing. If you're engaged in a very formal analysis of your coffee program, then you can start picking up on those things earlier and earlier. The more you're tasting your product formally, the more likely you're going to be to pick out an error or a tiny little variation. Also, product matching. For instance, if everybody in your town is saying, we love this particular roaster, and you have the desire to have a similar style profile on one of your blends, having formal sensory analysis where you have random people come in off the street and say, can you taste the difference? And if so, what, can help you do some of that. Now, I'm not advocating that you go stealing people's blends or anything like that, but that is something that goes on in the corporate world 100%.
Steal their business, not their blend.
That's right. Steal their business. No. Grow the business overall, then you're both successful. Ranges of acceptability or flaw. So for instance, if you are here's a really good example of a corporate setting of this. I believe it was Post cereal had a particular cereal that was packed full of sugar, and so they ran a sensory analysis test on ranges of acceptability on sugar. They lowered the sugar by different amounts in several different cereals, and they put that out to several different focus groups to see if they could tell when that sugar was lessened. They were able to eventually lower the sugar in their cereal by about 20%, and nobody noticed the difference. That saved the company something like $17 million that year. So you can use sensory analysis to probe into different areas of your business. So there are 3 major categories of sensory analysis. One is discrimination, which is simply telling one thing from another thing. One is description, and this we use a lot in cupping, and this is where you would sometimes see the flavor wheel come into use. Deciding what descriptive qualities or characteristics exist within something. This is also great for recipe development. If you have cinnamon you're putting into a scone and nobody can taste the cinnamon, then why are you wasting money on the cinnamon in that scone? Or should you put more cinnamon in the scone? Things like that. And preference, which they call a hedonic scale. How much do you enjoy this on a scale of 1 to 10? That would be our cupping score at the end, kind of. But even within our cupping scores, there are certain criteria that build that score that a regular consumer may not really care about. We score a coffee very high if it has very high levels of perceivable acidity, whereas a customer may score that coffee really low. So having several different types of panels when you are making your decisions for how you're going to purchase, how you're going to roast, how you're going to brew, all of those things is very important.
Joe, can I give you an example there?
Please.
In all of our coffees, we try to put notes that permit our customers to figure out how does that coffee fit into my offerings. Something like the Burundi right now, that's a very complex, relatively delicate cup. And so that is for a good niche when you want to expand your offerings. Another example will be when I have people over to my home, I will typically serve a guat, a Mexican Chiapas, a company, a Colombian, because I call those crowd pleasers. Mm-hmm. Time after time, when I offer coffees at my home, if I offered the Yemen to the party of 12, 1 or 2 are going to care for it, and most are going to say that's different.
Yeah.
As opposed to if I put a Chiapas out there, the chocolates and the nuts, everybody just loves it. So I've used sensory analysis of my social crowd to determine what I'm going to serve. And I think likewise, as these small roasters begin their business, they're going to want to consider that kind of understanding when they determine what kind of buys they want to make.
Absolutely. So as you are moving into sensory analysis, if you so choose to, consider the type of panel that you're going to involve. There are 4 major types of panels. First is us. We're the trained panel. We are the expert in the field. We can taste all of the nuance, and we know what is bad and what is good, and not only what is bad and good, but why it's bad and why it's good. If you're not to that point, don't worry, you'll get there. Continue on your journey. Talk to other people that are tasting. Taste other coffees that people are tasting and see how you can calibrate with them. The next one is what we would call the untrained expert. The untrained expert is somebody who is very, very familiar with that product, but they're not particularly trained. And this is of no offense at all, but just the honest truth is a lot of home roasters would be considered untrained experts. That's why we're here to
Emphasize
hopefully make
expert.
hopefully we'll make you a trained expert as well. But somebody that is very tuned into the flavor, but may not have had the access to the information to say why that flavor exists. Is it desirable? Is it not desirable? And all of those things. This could also be, this is a very broad and generic example, but think about a consumer that drinks one type of beer, like a Budweiser consumer. They've drank that beer ever since they were 3 years old, if you're from St. Louis anyway. And they would notice every tiny little detail that changes in that recipe over the course of their lives. they're not trained in the process of that beer, but they are certainly an expert, and they might notice a difference or a nuance that even a professional trained expert may not notice because of their exposure.
They're an expert just on Budweiser.
That's right.
Okay.
And then the next one is a mixed panel. A mixed panel has some experts and some non-experts, some novices. And then the final panel is a consumer-based panel. A consumer-based panel could be people just randomly off the street who have never been exposed to that product at all. So as you are putting together thoughts on buying decisions, on roasting decisions, it's really important to think about who is it that I'm targeting, how do I want to grow this? So then as you're making a buying decision, having the trained panel, possibly, and this is hypothetical, maybe looking for things like price versus quality, potential taints, things like that. Having that untrained panel, who is also expert, say, is this in line with what you've come to expect from us as your relationship as a company? Having that mixed panel to see where tolerance levels are, and having that consumer panel because you also want to grow your business. You want to see what are people that are going to walk in off the street that have never seen me before, never seen my brand, what are they also going to think? And now you have depth to your decision making in a really powerful way. And you can start that as a very small company. It does take time, but this is what large companies are doing. They're doing this in your neighborhood, and they're doing this with all of the products that they release.
Joe, as we look at this, we here at Mill City have two groups of roasters. Those that are really just roasting for themselves, and those that are got small businesses going, or they're growing their business. I know sensory analysis is more than cupping, but the questions I get from people revolve mainly around how can I improve my sensory analysis, my own, in terms of cupping and understanding the industry. What would be your suggestions to this spectrum of people that we have?
Yeah, my biggest recommendation, well, there are two parts to that question. There's the part that is refining your own personal skill in taste and the ability to pin a word to a flavor. That is a huge hurdle. The second one is once you can say, I taste grass, knowing whether or not tasting grass is a good thing or a bad thing, why grass is in your coffee, and how you can eliminate it if you want to eliminate it. And that's where tasting with other professionals and being calibrated comes into play. So the first one is learning how to taste and pin a word to it, which I call building your lexicon. We can all taste unless you have a physiological problem. You can taste. You don't have to have more taste buds on your tongue in order to taste. Most of your ability to taste is your olfactory system, and you've got that. You're built with it, most likely. And you have the ability to remember things. So one of the things that I did, because I'm a super nerd, was in my kitchen with my wife when I was just starting into coffee, actually even a little bit before starting into coffee, I would take different herbs and spices and different qualities of sugar and different types of salt, and I would brew them in water, and then I would ask my wife to blind them, and she is very loving and would roll her eyes and do it for me. And then I would go in and taste and see if I could figure out exactly which one was which one had more oregano and less basil, which one had more basil and more oregano, and things like that. So you
Was
can
that
train
so
yourself.
you heighten your
Yes.
awareness of sense of taste?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be coffee.
It does not have to be coffee. As a matter of fact, I would say it probably shouldn't be coffee because, well, if you look at the wine world, this is a tool that wine experts use. They'll take oak chips, for instance, and put them into a wine glass with wine in it, blind the glass, and then they'll smell and see if they can smell, like how does the aroma of oak meld with the aroma of the wine that they're drinking. Things like that, where you can maybe pull it out a little bit more expand it out to where it's obvious, and then whenever it's a little less obvious, you're a little bit more keen to it. So you can do the training, and training your system is just like any other workout. You're getting better at it, and you're building language around it, so that you can be more easily, or you can more easily define something. But then that has to come with communication, because really you can taste the thing. The only reason that you would want to pin a word to it is for communication.
To share that information.
Exactly. Or to brag, whatever. So as you are doing this, you also have to have buddies that are doing it with you, some of which are hopefully professionals. We live in an amazing time. You're sitting there watching me on the internet right now. It could be live, could be a year from now from when I'm recording this. You can do the same with sensory analysis. You can share coffees across a large swath of humanity, and you can have opportunities to share your notes with those people. But the last part of this is biases. And this is the warning. How are we doing on time?
No, that's me.
Oh, okay.
I've got to
Yes.
watch my biases on things like
Yeah.
sensory analysis.
Yes, it's very difficult. So let's say you're the boss and you have a relationship with a farmer in Colombia, and you need to make a buying decision, and you know that Colombian coffee is on the table. You have a bias. You probably shouldn't make that buying decision if you want to make a quality-based buying decision. Keeping things as blind and formal and detached from our emotional state as possible is very important. There are countless websites that you can go to learn about formal sensory analysis. They will give you all kinds of tools, even charts, all different stuff. They'll list all of the biases. They're actually, fleshed out. They are real. We all have them psychologically and physiologically. So I recommend that you jump online, learn more about how formal sensory analysis can be a tool that you can use to better your company and better your offerings and prepare yourself for doing some hugely successful business.
Just to show you how I deal with a bias, as I get samples from Joe's shop in working with Adrian, I don't ask for the price. I don't ask for the score. Now, I know Adrian's not going to give me a coffee below 86. That's the starting point.
That's why he deals with Adrian and not me.
But I don't want to know that Papua New Guinea is at $4 a pound and this Colombian's at 5 1/4.
Yeah.
I don't want that biasing me. I want to determine it based on what's presented on the table, not what dollar is associated with it.
Absolutely. Because expensive coffees, like expensive wines, if we know that they're expensive, they taste better.
Yep,
And
good.
studies have shown these things.
Nick, you've got a question.
Do. Erhard, good friend of Dave's.
From Vienna, Austria, Erhard.
He is inquiring, now I forgot the question, how to discern special taste in coffee from failures in the roast or defects in the coffee.
That's great. Failures in the roast can be corrected. So if it's a nuance of coffee that you're tasting and it's on a particular roast, then roast it slightly different and see if that nuance is gone. If it's anything to do with carbon, smoke, burning, anything like that, if barbecue, you know that it's roast related. If it's anything to do with grassiness, it's
Paper.
generally going to be roast related. Paper could be old coffee. It could be under roasted coffee as well, or baked out coffee as well. If it's a green coffee related flavor and it's really negative, there's a high probability that it will only be a small percentage of the coffee. So you'll get it in one cup, but you won't get it in the next cup. It'll kind of be something that pops in and out. If that's the case, you know that is a defect in the coffee. There are certain defects that will be, across the board. Like for instance, if you bought a coffee that's fermented and you taste vinegar in every cup, that is not going to be because of the way that you've roasted it. That's going to be more because of how that coffee was prepared, how it was processed at origin.
Let's back up, Joe. Even before you roast it, what are the things you're doing? I'm putting my nose right in it and smelling it first, and then I'm doing visuals.
I don't do the nose check on the green so much because, embarrassingly enough, I'm allergic to green coffee. So I will start sneezing and sometimes get
And that's
hives.
why I use Adrian.
So I get a lot more out of the roasted coffee itself. Actually, when grinding tons of coffee, I'll break out in hives too. So
But you're looking at visuals. You're looking for defects.
Absolutely.
Coffee, berry bore, you're looking for splits. You're looking for disparity in size.
yes.
All of those are done before you're even roasting.
Yeah, so green coffee grading, and there's a book that the SCA has that is definitive. You can do that green coffee grading. For instance, before I drop this Yemen in, you may have seen me at the beginning pull out a bean, and that's because that's a full black. That is a defect, and that bean would taste really horrible if we roasted it and put that into a cup. Once it's roasted, you can't really distinguish it from the rest because they all kind of become the same color. So green coffee grading is great. Once it's roasted, if you see a defect in your cooling tray, pull it out. If there's
Get those
a Quaker,
Quakers out.
yeah, pull it out. Why leave it in there? If you're sample roasting, don't pull it out because you want to taste and grade, the coffee as it is. But yeah,
Yeah, that's representative of what you're buying.
right.
Very good. Nick, any more questions?
that
We'll
helped.
wrap it up.
And really just time and tasting over and over will inform you later on as you're getting better at this.
Auf Wiedersehen, Erhard.
Brian wants to know where you got your sweater.
Ooh.
Oh, good gravy, man. I don't know. First of all, my wife does my shopping, and second of all, the sweater's probably 12 years old. Thank you, though.
Yeah, we told him 1974.
That's close enough. You are so bad. Now you've messed up my closure. Nick's got sampler pack on the website. 5 different coffees, 2 pounds each. He's throwing it at me. This is the Brazil part of the pack. 5 coffees, 2 pounds each. Nick's got that on the website. This month, the Yemen Mocha that Joe just roasted. Joe talked about how when you can't hear that first crack, what you're discerning and how to roast it. Joe will be back next month. I believe it's the last Wednesday of the month, which is March 25th. And on March 25th, we're going to have a surprise announcement. So you'll want to watch in then. And Mill City Roasters will have a booth at the SCAA, Atlanta, Georgia, the 15th through the 17th. If you're in on the conference, please stop by, say hello to Nick, Steve, me, Serena, Angie. We'll be glad. We appreciate the questions.
I
Joe?
will also be at SCAA, and I'll be at the Roasters Guild booth and the Roasters Championship stage. I think there might be a couple of seats left if you want to try on the Roasters Championship for size this year. Ally Coffee Importing Company is actually going to be sending the top 2 finishers to Brazil. So there's a pretty cool prize there. And I believe the number 1 person also gets a Roasters Guild retreat trip. Along with that, next Wednesday, a week from today at noon Central Time, you can go to Cafe Import's website, or you can join us at, is it Indeed Brewing?
Yes.
Yes, Indeed. Indeed Brewing right here between Mill City and Cafe Imports, actually. We're going to have a bunch of producers up. We're going to be doing a tour with them, asking them all kinds of questions. They're going to be putting on presentations, and it's going to be awesome. We're going to be live streaming that on our website. So I'd love to see you
Nick,
there.
Steve, and I will be there, so I'll try and remember not to wear my same sweater on the camera.
Sounds great. I will be wearing my beard.
Very good. That's a wrap. We appreciate you watching, and send in those questions. We'll be glad to entertain them.
Thank you.
Goodbye.